Well, good morning to all of you, and thanks for the opportunity to join in this very important discussion. I was listening really very, very carefully to the fantastic presentations we heard in the first part of the morning, particularly about these effects of technology on the future of work. And I think I need to begin my presentation with a confession. I come from the north of England. I come from a part of the world where the Luddites were particularly active about 150 years ago. You know, the history books don't tell us if they were lacking in curiosity or if they hadn't got the knowledge to adapt to the new technologies that were coming. But the history books do tell us that they felt that they had to act in the way that they did, breaking up those textile machines, because they saw no place for themselves in the future that was unfurling around them. This future of technology-driven automation of the industries in which they had worked. And you know, that leads me to my first reflections on what I heard this morning. I've got two or three thoughts that emerged from what I listened to this morning. The first is that as we look at the future of work, the future of our world of work, I think we need to beware of the danger, and I would say the mistake, of falling into a sort of an assumption of techno-determinism, that everything that's going to happen in the next 5, 10, or 50 years is going to be decided definitively by the forward march of technology. Now, we know that technology, and we've heard it said in the most brilliant way this morning, is going to have a massive effect on what happens. But I want to put it to you, and this is my first point, that the future will be what we make of it. And therefore, the discussion on the future of work is a policy discussion. We have to treat it as a policy discussion, and we have to understand that it is us together that will make the future that we want. And that's my first point. The second point, and I do understand, and I appreciate the invitation, that this is a discussion about Norway's place in this unfurling future. But you'll understand as well that I have to come with a global perspective, an organization with 185 member states. And believe me, the future of work debate going on in Burkina Faso is quite different from the future of work discussion taking place in Norway. So let's try to place, if we can, our thinking in this global perspective. So policy and global perspective are what I want to try to bring to the discussion this morning. Now, luckily, fortunately, the international policy debate about the future of work is going forward. And it starts where it has to start, with an appreciation of current conditions in global labor markets. And let me say something which I'm sure you're all aware of, but needs to be said in the framework of this discussion. We are in the midst, however it feels in Oslo and in Norway, of a global jobs crisis. Consider this: there are more than 200 million people in the world who don't have a job. That's a record high. And even as we talk about recovery from that global crisis that hit us in 2008, the fact of the matter is that global unemployment is continuing to increase, and at current rates of growth will continue to increase for the foreseeable future. Since that crisis of 2008, the global economy is on a lower growth trajectory than it previously was, and this inevitably means that we're going to face a major jobs challenge. And we should put to one side this notion of jobless growth. The problem is, in fact, that we're not growing quickly enough. The employment intensity of growth post-crisis is pretty much what it was before the crisis. Now, I said the policy discussion is going forward. It is. You would have seen that the United Nations, and we're part of the United Nations, decided in September, and Norway was right at the center of this debate, to set its 2030 development agenda. And in the middle of that 2030 development agenda, jobs stand. There is a commitment to create decent work for all, to give everybody the opportunity for full and productive employment. That's a great commitment to make. It's the sort of things that people say in New York at the General Assembly. What does it mean? It means that in the next 15 years, the global economy has to create nothing less than 600 million jobs. Most of those, increasingly, in the developing and emerging world. So let's look at that future of work challenge and the role of technology in that perspective. And that does bring me to this notion, which I think is at the heart of all of our thinking, of transformational change. I think all of us have the feeling, I feel it in this room, I feel it in the other countries I visit, that the world is on the brink of some type of transformational change. And a large part, not the whole story, but a large part of that transformational change has to do with technology. We heard Professor McAfee talking about the second machine age. Those of you who are going to Davos for the World Economic Forum later this month, and there's always lots of Norwegians there, so I'm sure there's many of you here, you know what the title of the forum is this year. Mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a good title, not just because technology is at the center of our thinking, but because the challenge, and this is the point I want to make, is how we master this industrial revolution. It's not a question of just letting it run ahead. We have to understand, I believe, the labor market implications of it and react, and anticipate and react to them. Now, the most frequently asked question, at least to the ILO, about this unfurling industrial revolution is, what will it do for jobs? We know the old Schumpeterian equation of creative destruction, that yes, technology destroys jobs, but in the long run, after the bumpy period in between, it creates more, that the creation outweighs the destruction. And that would be, I think, the conclusion from the first three industrial revolutions. But there is a feeling out there and a strong body of scholarly opinion which says this fourth industrial revolution is different, that this time it is different, and that the balance of creation and destruction might, for the first time, be negative. And if that is the case, without our intervention and our policy initiatives, then we're facing something which I think would incite us to slightly less optimism than some of us would like to place at the center of our debate. So we have the quantity issue, but we also have, I think, a qualitatively novel and different situation today, because the technologies that have been outlined to us so brilliantly this morning have, I believe, within them the capacity to transform the manner in which production takes place and is undertaken. Now, I say this from a starting point in which more or less 50% of the global workforce is in a salaried relationship. They have an employer who they can point to, an employer that pays them a salary or a wage every month, every day, or every week. And that number's going up, only slowly, but it's around 50%. But at the same time, you're seeing a diminution for the first time of the classic full-time, permanent employment relationship contract. It's about 25% of the global workforce. It's beginning to go down. And that's due to a number of things. It's due to complex subcontracting processes, outsourcing, things you're familiar with. But now it seems, and this is technologically mediated, there is the possibility of mediating through technology forms of production which could be extremely impactful on the employment relationship. And we know the classic examples. Wherever I go, Uber seems to have got there just before me or just after me or when I'm there. And there's a great debate about the Uberization of the economy. Uber, the biggest taxi firm in the world, which owns no cars. Airbnb, the biggest accommodation company in the world, which owns no property. Facebook, the biggest media company in the world that creates no content. And there is a school of thought that we're moving towards a series of virtual production platforms which will radically and qualitatively transform the manner in which production and work is organized. There might be a wide variety of opinions in this room about whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. And I don't want to venture into that debate this morning. But what is very clear to me is we need to start thinking about these things, to decide what societal objectives need to be met by these tendencies, and start to act to make sure that they're put in place. There is a third element of transformation. So you've got technology, you've got the changing nature of work, and there's a third thing, and I'm only going to note it sort of in telegraphic way. The world has become a more uncertain place, a more conflictual place for many different reasons. And this needs to, I think, lead us to question some of our assumptions about the direction that the global economy is going in. One of the worst predictions ever made was that the end of the Cold War meant the end of history. We'd come to a sort of a stable consensus about the way the global economy and the global community would operate. For reasons which we all know about, and I won't go into this morning, that assumption looks entirely discredited in our current circumstances. So we have an amazingly complex and challenging policy debate ahead of us. And I think we're at the beginning of it. And I want to just point to two things which I think need to orient our thinking as we tackle them. And I can summarize this in literally 2 words. The first is inclusiveness. The word of inclusiveness, the idea of inclusiveness, is more and more present in our thinking. It takes a sort of the form of nobody left behind, nobody left out. We know the dangers of exclusion in our economies, and we see exclusion happening too much. It strikes me that we need to organize our labor markets. We need to act politically to make inclusiveness, and that, by the way, also means diversity at work. We need to put that at the center of the things we're trying to do. And I would subsume under this notion of inclusiveness issues of equality and inequality. We have reached quite dramatic levels of inequality in many parts of the world. And I saw what Professor McAfee said about the egalitarian reflexes of Norway. And I've seen that and I appreciate it. And I think the tolerance of inequality in your country is much lower than in others. But what is new about inequality in the world is it is now recognized as constituting a brake, a handicap on economic growth. Not the ILO saying this, it's the International Monetary Fund, it's the OECD. Current levels of inequality represent a brake on economic growth. So we can add to our social concerns the economic imperatives of getting inequality tackled if we are to grow and create jobs. The diagnosis is there. I think the cure has yet to be properly worked out. Inclusiveness. And the second, and I can say this with a great deal more optimism after the Paris Conference on Climate Change, is about sustainability. And I just want to say, and what's been said already today makes my job much easier, that the technological revolution that is coming, I think, is unambiguously a real help to us, a tremendous tool in trying to tackle the challenges of sustainability. Now, I have to say that I believe that those 3 advantages and disadvantages that we saw about Norway, oil wealth, social norms, and egalitarian instincts, and the third one, which was state intervention, I think these are unambiguously positives for Norway. Unambiguously positives. The record shows it. The historical record of achievement in Norway shows that you have used all of these 3 circumstances to your advantage. If you think oil wealth is a curse, I'm British. Try doing without it. It's pretty good when you ain't got it, believe me. And I also think that your egalitarian instincts and your institutional strength, and here I want to join with the Prime Minister in congratulating the NHO and LO on the Sustainability Pact that they are working on. This is exactly the right way to tackle these challenges. Dialogue, tripartism, social targets, social policy objectives to manage the future of work. To quote Shakespeare, our future is not written in the stars. It's there for us to make. And I think this year, 2016, you made a great start in tackling that challenge. Thanks for listening.